It's no secret that the 2022 Eagles pass rush was historic. They had 70 sacks last season. That's third all-time and 15 more than the next closest team last year. They had a penchant for getting after the quarterback, but their run defense showed cracks throughout the season that ultimately unraveled at the most inopportune time. Part of their undoing was a consequence of their commitment to rushing the passer. In steps new defensive coordinator Sean Desai, and looking at his history, I believe there are some things he will do differently. So in today's video, I will look at a part of the Eagles' defense from last year and compare with Desai's styles and philosophies of the past to see how their run defense could be improved in 2023. Before I start, I want to preface this by saying there are several reasons a run defense might be underperforming, and on the 2022 defense, there were many reasons for their struggles. I don't want people to think this is going to solve all of the issues, rather it's a piece of the puzzle to improving the run defense next season. In their quest to get after the quarterback last season, the Eagles implemented a couple of techniques with their edge players. They would frequently use wide nine techniques, aligning well outside the tackle or tight end. This allowed their explosive edge players to use their speed and acceleration to beat pass blockers outside. You would often find Eagles defensive ends and outside linebackers exploding up the field with their first two steps to maximize their burst off the line in case it was a passing play. While this helped lead to sacks and pressures, there are some drawbacks to their methods when it comes to stopping the run. With their edges working to get upfield quickly, they would often create vertical seams like you see here. And with their alignment so wide, natural horizontal gaps would develop like on this play. Teams use different strategies to exploit their techniques. The Eagles started seeing a lot of gap scheme runs. They would encounter many plays where the end man on the line of scrimmage would block down on the defensive tackle inside and use a pulling blocker to kick out the edge to create a gap to run through. The issue for the Eagles is the wide alignment and the upfield start makes it tough to close the space between the down block and kick out. Ideally, we would like to see the edge be able to compress the gap by initiating contact with the kickout block much quicker. Let's take a look at a play from Cam Jordan and see how the Saints used him to defend gap runs. First, the Saints have him aligned in a 5 technique, much closer to the tackle. Notice his eyes. He's keying the offensive linemen and reacting to their movement. Also notice his feet are closer to parallel than the Eagles players. This puts him in a better position to move laterally at the snap of the ball. When the ball is snapped, the tackle steps inside and Cam moves laterally with him, replacing the spot the tackle just vacated. As the kickout approaches, the gap is already closed. Cam uses a wrong arm technique, taking his outside arm and putting it inside of the kickout block. This forces the running back to bounce the run outside to the unblocked second level players. Cam just makes a Cam play and spins off the block and gets the tackle himself. Let's compare this to the Eagles. Here, Josh Sweat is using a setup that shows he's looking to rush the passer first, play run second. His eyes are keying the ball, and his feet are staggered like in a track stance. His first step is explosive towards the area where the quarterback will drop at. He actually does a really good job processing the play, recognizing its run by the second step and then starting to move laterally. But because his alignment was so wide, he's too late squeezing the gap, and a wide alley is formed. Like with the Saints, if he was aligned closer to the tackle, he could step down the line as the tackle blocked away, forcing the run to spill to the free-flowing second-level defenders. These issues show outside of just gap run plays as well. Starting from a wider alignment creates natural horizontal gaps. The tackle has space to work out to the end and widen him. It doesn't help that the end is working to get upfield instead of moving laterally to close the space. Teams can game plan against this. Instead of trying to win the edge on outside zone, teams will use a mid-zone variation, opting to widen or turn the end upfield and run the ball where the end used to be. Let's look at another situation where the end getting upfield was an issue. On this play, the Texans are running inside zone to the offense's left. Dameon Pierce is at running back, and he knows that this run is likely not going to hit the frontside B gap pre-snap due to the alignment of the linebacker. TJ Edwards is lined up outside of the tackle, which is a long way for the center and the guard to be able to combo to. So Pierce knows that this run is likely going to hit inside of Edwards. Pierce is really focusing on the backside combo block, working off of Kaiser White's movement to find a seam. Unfortunately, for the Texans, Hassan Reddick is able to knife his way into the backfield, forcing Pierce to run back towards his left. However, Pierce was patient allowing the combo time to develop, and his slight shift backside influenced Kaiser White to fall back out of his gap. On the other side, Javon Hargrave is slow finding his anchor and gets widened a good amount. But regardless, we again see an Eagles edge defender attacking upfield, and the tackle is more than happy to escort him in that direction. This is a play Josh Sweat could have made with a closer alignment and footwork designed to keep him playing laterally on the line of scrimmage. I've highlighted where Sweat started the play, and you can see where the run ultimately ends up going. Though there are other defenders to blame on this play as well, that's a 5-yard gain that could have been held to 1 or 2 by Sweat. Let's look at a play from Desai's time in Chicago. You can see the defensive end keying the tackle, reacting based on the direction he moves. He takes 1 step forward, bringing his feet close to parallel. This allows him to play with a strong, wide base and uncoil his hips into contact, knocking the tackle off balance. Instead of getting upfield, he is able to play laterally along the line of scrimmage before redirecting and tackling the running back after he bounces outside. A significantly different outcome based on small changes in technique. There were several instances on film where the edge defenders went way upfield, leaving huge vertical seams to exploit. Big plays were available for teams ready to take advantage. Opposing offenses knew how aggressive the Eagles were and would essentially welcome the defenders upfield and then attempt to turn and seal them. The Chiefs took advantage of this when it mattered most. They designed a play specifically to hit the area that was vacated by the end getting upfield. You can see the tackle working to torque Sweat up the field. The Chiefs were able to gain 14 yards on a 3rd and 1 play. Backs didn't always choose to exploit the vertical seams created, but the opportunities were there. It was not uncommon to find an Eagles edge defender throwing a pass rush move on a tackle that took a pass set on a run play. When you have the end play tighter to the end man of the line of scrimmage and play with read and react principles, then they can squeeze gaps, force the ball to bounce, and make tackles. When looking at Desai's defenses from his time as coordinator in Chicago in 2021 and Seattle in 2022, it's clear that his edge defenders more often utilize techniques similar to the play we looked at earlier between the Bears and Steelers. They consistently played more run-focused techniques. Often, their eyes would be keying the blocker, not the ball, and reacting based on their movement. Instead of immediately accelerating vertically off the line, they consistently took read steps and played laterally along the line of scrimmage. Number 1, this helps eliminate vertical seams that can be exploited. But this also puts the player in better body positions to defeat the block, with feet rooted and able to play through their hips. This is extremely important for edge defenders, especially many on the Eagles, as they are often at a significant weight and strength disadvantage compared to offensive tackles. In addition to that, Desai's defenses were better able to close the gap on kickout blocks, often able to shut off gaps and force ball carriers to run side to side. The 49ers and Titans were 2 of the better run defenses last year and gave up the lowest yards per attempt on runs off tackle and outside last year. So I wanted to look at their defenses to see how they utilize their edge defenders. The 49ers are known for having an aggressive penetrating defense, so I expected to see a lot of plays where their ends were flying upfield. Though they still often played with wider alignments and keyed the ball instead of a blocker, they were much more patient at the line of scrimmage on early downs. They did a better job holding their ground and compressing gaps in general, and they played gap scheme runs better, able to take on kickout blocks quicker and force runs to bounce. The Titans played more run-focused techniques on early downs than both the Eagles and 49ers. They usually had tighter alignments to the end man of the line of scrimmage, keyed the blocker, and played laterally along the line. Did either team get into wide alignments and have their ends jet upfield? Of course, especially the 49ers, as they had more of an attack mindset. But it was to less of a degree than the Eagles. Now, I'm not saying the Eagles' edge players never had a run-focused mindset at certain times, or even more so in certain games, because they did. And they did well in those scenarios and when asked to perform those techniques. But it was clear getting after the quarterback was a bigger focus of the team. What both the 49ers and Titans had in common, especially the Titans, was bigger personnel. None of the Titans' edge defenders that played significant snaps weighed less than 260 pounds, with 3 of the 4 weighing between 269 and 285 pounds. The 49ers had 3 players with significant playing time on the edge. Nick Bosa is 265, Charles Omenihu is 280, and Samson Ebukam is 245. Compare that with the Eagles' trio of edge defenders. Reddick at 240, Sweat at 255, and Brandon Graham at 265 pounds. The Eagles' use of wider alignments makes sense given that their two starting edge defenders are lighter players whose superpowers are their speed and quickness. Giving them a longer runway to build up speed makes sense. Desai didn't have many edge defenders over 260 in Seattle, so it's hard to look back at his time there and determine if he will rotate heavier players in. But looking back at his time in Chicago, he would rotate in bigger players throughout the game based on down and distance scenarios. One thing I'd like to see for the Eagles is to get Milton Williams more involved at defensive end in certain scenarios. He's a bit of a tweener in terms of his size, and I think he would fit in well playing at defensive end on early downs while bumping inside on passing downs. Milton showed a lot of growth in his game as the season went on last year, and the Eagles need to find more ways to get him on the field. That would help the Birds add the much-needed size on the edge that they were missing last year. The Eagles' Achilles heel in 2022 was their run defense. It was an issue all year, and it showed up in a big way in the Super Bowl. Patrick Mahomes didn't have to have an all-time great Mahomes game to beat the Eagles. His 27 attempts was tied for his second lowest all season, and his yards per attempt was his fifth lowest of the season. Unfortunately, because the Eagles could not stop the Chiefs on the ground, they were able to stay ahead of the chains. The Eagles were only able to get the Chiefs to third down 8 times. Their season average was 13 third downs forced, and of those third downs, only 3 were longer than 4 yards. 2 were incomplete, and the third was a defensive holding on Bradbury. The Eagles thrived on getting teams into long down and distance situations and unleashing their third down stunt and pressure packages. But because of their run defense, they could not get to those situations in the Super Bowl. And frankly, their strength of schedule last year likely masked those issues all season. The Eagles led on 71% of all snaps last season and were able to jump out to big leads in many games, forcing teams to abandon the run. They won't have that same luck this upcoming season, as they are projected to have the hardest schedule. They will need to improve their run defense, or we will continue to see replays of what played out during the Super Bowl. As I mentioned earlier, there are several reasons that a run defense underperforms. At the end of the day, the Seahawks' run defense was worse than the Eagles last year, so changing one aspect of the run defense doesn't automatically mean it will be better. But Desai is coming to a Philadelphia roster that has more talent than the roster he left in Seattle, and as the old saying goes, the Jimmies and Joes are more important than the X's and O's. At some point, there is a trade-off between getting sacks and stopping the run. Rushing the passer isn't a privilege. You have to earn the right to rush the passer, and that comes with stopping the run so you can get to third and long. Finding the right balance between getting after the passer and stopping the run is not an easy task, but it's one that must be managed. It's now up to Sean Desai to figure out how to find that balance.